All right, we are in week 5 of the SpOKen Freely podcast, but technically week 0, because that's a thing. The Oklahoma high school football season, we had our first set of games, and we got our first taste of football in a pandemic. Will it work? Will it continue to work? How long will this last? We are going to dive into all that this week with our guest, who I'm very excited to have, even though this is our first time technically meeting, which is nuts to think about. But Austin Litterell, from the Chickasha Express, from the Chickasha Express Star, the sports editor. Austin, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we did have our first set of high school football games, and
Yes.
and it was a welcome distraction, especially given everything that had been happening in sports last week. It was just nice to be back out there on Friday night. It felt like a normal Friday night, and almost to a fault. It almost felt too normal because
Yes.
I don't know about you, but at the game I was at and at the games that a lot of other media members were at that I read about, not a ton of masks, not a ton of social distancing.
Yeah.
And I don't know of too many stadiums, and I'm going to find out more this week as more teams take the field, which stadiums actually had policies on limited number of capacity. The game that I was at in Frederick, and by the way, I don't mean this as any disrespect to any of the school districts, certainly not to Frederick, because they did their best. They had signs up about, please do not congregate around the concession stand, please wear a mask. But you can only lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. And so I wanted to ask, because you were at the Chickasha Altus game, what did you see that gave you encouragement? What did you see that kind of gave you pause? What were your feelings on the night?
Well, I saw a lot of coaches with masks, so that was really an encouraging thing. I love to see that. As for the stands and stuff, and this is in a city with a mask mandate, I can't say I was too encouraged about what I saw. There were a lot of people with masks, don't get me wrong, but there were also a lot of people at that game, and there were also a ton of people in the stands, no social distancing, not wearing masks. It was kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, and that is going to be the thing that we see going forward. I saw somebody online, I want to say from probably the Oklahoman, that one of the Moore schools, they had to announce twice over the PA system, please wear masks, and people still wouldn't do it. And this is the same day that I'd seen in a document online that, and again, I know it's a big school district, but at least 11 different schools, whether it be elementary, middle, or high school, 11 different schools in the Moore public school system had some cases of COVID. That's bonkers. And and I understand that, I understand with these football teams that, these kids are usually pretty healthy and the coaches are doing the best they can. The issue is, at these games, you see a lot of grandparents, a lot of parents, a lot of small children. And I'm not saying that they can't enjoy football. If that is their choice, but you also want it to be done in a safe manner. And that's going to be very interesting to see, because we already saw the OSSA kind of put the onus on the school districts. We're going to see if the school districts basically do what a lot of them already have done, which is basically kind of put the onus on the fans. Like, we'll tell you what to do. We're not going to arrest you because you don't have a mask necessarily. But I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what this is like going forward, because, and I feel like I've said this in like 4 of my 5 podcasts now, but I always had a feeling the high school football season would start. I never had a good feeling that it would end on time. And I still don't know. And again, it's going to be a week-to-week process. It's not like this thing is going to magically go away come week 4. So I think that once school starts and once we see a lot of fans, that's going to be the big issue for Lawton, especially because the 3 Lawton schools are not in the same district, so they play each other the first 3 weeks of the season. Those are going to be the highest attended games at Cameron Stadium all year. There's probably going to be about 8,000 people. You do the math on that. If 8,000 people are allowed at Cameron Stadium, I don't know what that's going to look like. Probably not good.
Yeah, see, I was going to come and say to enforce social distancing at these games, you probably you have to have a limited capacity.
Yeah,
that's your best bet to even be able to enforce it. I guess you can go in and stop the game, but I mean, I've been in full support of limited capacity all along, and
it's one of those things where I attended a graduation back in June, and they had the seats on the football field spread out 6 feet. Yeah. You did eventually see people move the chairs because God gave us free will. And that being said, most of the people that gathered were family members. And I understand that if you're going to have family members there that you spend time with, you're probably going to be in close proximity. You don't want to sit apart. I get that. The issue becomes with high schoolers because, I would say the issue becomes with high schoolers congregating at football games, but guess what? They're already in school, most of them. So it's not like that's why I've always said if these colleges especially are safe enough, apparently, to have kids go back, it's safe enough for football, I feel like. Certainly safe enough to at least have some fans, at least the students, because you're already deciding that it's not risky or that it's not too risky to have them on campus together. And and I know obviously both of us have a college in the town that we cover. And I know that D2 has already wiped out, or their conference at least has wiped out most sports for the fall. I don't know what NAIA looks like for USAO. Are they still having sports this fall?
Last I heard, sort of. Like, I think they are allowed. It's been a while since I've read what it said, but last I read, I think they were allowed to play some games, like non-conference games, I think, in the fall, but that wouldn't really count. But like conference games would be played in the spring.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
And it's like, just it's very weird.
Yeah, I remember it was something along those lines. Like I said, it's been a while since I've read exactly detail for detail what plan was, but I remember thinking, really? This is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, at least that's the Sooner Athletic Conference, maybe not the entire NAIA, as I think about it.
No, that's a good point. And the fact that it's going to be very interesting to me. And one thing that I've always credited the U.S. or the OSSAA with is it made sense logistically to not put out. At least to me, it made sense to not put out a across the board kind of rule for everybody, because what's good for a Class A school district is not going to be the same for a Class 6A school district. You are probably going to see some issues, especially I was very surprised that after Broken Arrow and some of these Tulsa area schools were no longer allowed to play the Mansfield schools from Texas.
Right.
That Broken Arrow went and played Bentonville West, which is Northwest Arkansas, which was one of the hot spots this summer.
Yeah.
My family was actually supposed to go to Northwest Arkansas for vacation. That got wiped out, as you can imagine. And I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see a lot of these teams that do interstate travel. Not to say that interstate travel in general is bad during this time. You just got to be careful. And I think it's going to be very interesting. Now, I would be remiss. I started this without. I did introduce you, but tell for our guests that don't know you very well, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into sports media, what made you want to, and kind of how you got to where you are.
Well, I kind of grew up, played sports, wasn't really good at it, but good at them at all. But I grew up around the sports world. My sister played, my dad played when he was in school. So sports was kind of my whole life growing up, but I wasn't good enough to really play it. So I think, but I kind of discovered, I'm not a terrible writer. I can,
Right.
I can, I can, I can. It kind of started with my love. I'm good at making stuff up, and
Yeah.
so just with different types of papers and stuff. And so like sports, the story's kind of laid out for you. So
That's
like,
true.
I think I can do that. And so I kind of didn't know I was going to do newspaper until, my third year of college or so when I joined the student paper. And then it kind of just got, did that, got a job in my hometown, Elk City, worked at the paper out there. And then I ended up in Chickasha.
And you were a graduate of UCO, correct?
Yes.
The roll shows the Broncos there in Edmond, and
yes.
It's interesting that you bring up Elk City working at that paper, because we jokingly refer to the Elk City paper as the farm system of the Lawton Constitution, because I think we had about 3 different writers that had worked at Elk City that went on to work with the Constitution. It's definitely kind of, not to call it a stepping stone paper, it does good in its own right, but it is interesting how many people, how many very good, successful sports writers have come through that area.
We were talking about Tyler Palmatier before this. He worked
Tyler,
out there before.
Tyler came through there, and William Carroll, who worked for us last year, and I want to say there was another one. I couldn't remember if Jacob Unruh worked. I don't think he did, but there was somebody else. There was another one.
I'm gonna scroll through Twitter earlier and find his name and hate it.
It might have been, I can't remember if Andrew Kennedy did, but
because he also worked. I think he went from Lawton to Piedmont.
Oh, Blake Colson. It might have been Blake Colson.
Yes.
It's Blake Colson. Yeah. Yes. Good old Blake. It's
sorry, Blake.
Yeah. But that is one thing that I really enjoy about sports writing, and especially in the state of Oklahoma, is the camaraderie. I mentioned at the top of this podcast that you and I have never actually met face to face. This is my first time hearing your voice.
I know.
Yeah, we followed each other on social media for about 3 years or so.
Yeah.
And I really take pride in knowing that people, you meet guys like yourself, or guys like Colin and Clinton, guys like Andy Morphew at the Duncan Banner, people that are just really good people as well as good writers. And it's really fun.
Yeah, and that's what I love too. Like, everyone has been willing to help each other out. Like I just sent you, I helped you with the Lawton Mac Chickasha softball.
That's true.
Story, which was a celebration of football season beginning with a 17-10 final score.
Yeah, that was, which was bonkers to me, because I just covered a game that was over in like an hour and a half, and that
this one went well over 2.
Oh man, yeah, and and you mentioned celebration of football starting. I had Kevin Green, my old buddy, on last week when we talked about the beginning of high school football. And man, some of the games that we had this past weekend really did. Some lived up to their billing, some less so. But you were at Chickasha and Altus, and we'll get to that in a minute. But some of the big games that Kevin and I had talked about, from the southwest, more southwest part of the state. I know you're a little north of us, but I mean, obviously the Cash and El Reno game ended up being a dandy, and that blew my mind. Our writer for the guy writing for the Constitution, covering that game, Chris Wilson, he had been texting me throughout the night while I was at Frederick, and he was like, man, I don't know if Cash can hang with this passing game. And I had heard about Dorian Plumley, and I had always heard that he was a very good athlete, and that, passing wise, he was good, but that he might, it might not be his position in college. But sounded like they just threw almost at will against Cash, and they're down 35-21, and I just kind of stopped checking my phone at a certain point, and then I get a text from Chris that says we're going to OT, and my jaw dropped. And hats off to Farron Griffin and Cash. I covered them last year, and they're a fun team to watch. I know that running the ball and a lot of counters and a lot of end arounds might not be the most exciting brand of football for a lot of people in this Patrick Mahomes age of spread offenses, but if done right, they're extremely effective. And, for them to put up 35 points, 21 of which in the last 15 minutes of game time, that's really impressive, especially against a top 5 Class 5A team that a lot of people think can go far this year. Also in 5A, you had Bishop Kelly, who I picked to make the state title game. They took it to the defending 4A champs in Poto. I knew Poto wasn't going to be as good this year, but that's still pretty impressive from Bishop Kelly. Bishop McGinnis beats Muskogee 20-13. Slight surprise to me that Sand Springs beats Sapulpa. Then Guthrie, who I think a lot of people believe will be pretty good, beats Shawnee 34-16. But you were at a Class 5A and 4A matchup yourself, and Chickasha is a team that I had been, in part because of what you've been saying, I've been kind of high on riding into the season. I did not expect what they were able to do. I mean, I'd heard about the Lowry kid, is that his name? At quarterback.
Case Lowry.
I'd heard good things about him, but to put up, 5 touchdowns and 300 yards against an Altus team that's clearly going to be rebuilding this year in the first year under Dan Kokenauer.
Yeah, and this offense really got a chance to kind of show off its big play potential, which they can go for a long touchdown anytime, and they were able to do that when they were able to hold on to the ball. Had some turnover issues, but it's the first game of the season. I usually expect some issues with cleanliness in this type of situation, but I mean, Case Lowry was awesome. And what really impressed me about him is his mobility, because he's a big kid, but he can also move. And he had some really impressive runs too, which makes him and that offense even more dangerous. Yeah,
that's an area that I've always been intrigued by, because you're smack dab almost in between OKC and the Lawton area. So a lot of kids that, in fact, my very first, well, not the very first, but one of my very first sporting events that I ever covered for the Constitution when I got hired nearly 4 years ago was a basketball game between Elgin and Chickasha, and golly, I'm blanking on the name now. He was a baseball player.
Brock Henderson?
Brock Henderson dropped a 40-burger against Elgin, and everybody in the state, I was like, where did this kid come from? And everybody was like, that's not even his best sport, man.
Well, that's what I was about to say, it was, covering him was fun, because he was just naturally gifted. He also quarterbacked for Chickasha while
that's right
too.
Yeah.
So he's just a naturally gifted athlete.
And it's fun to find guys like that. And it's good to see a program like Chickasha kind of getting back to being that good. And maybe that's selfishly from my standpoint, because we cover, Elgin and Cash, who are in that district. And of course, Anna Darko was in that district a year ago. It's good to, that ends up being a hellacious district at the end of last year, with Chickasha knocking off Clinton, basically stealing a playoff spot. And I think they're out to prove this year that them making the playoffs was no fluke. That wasn't just happenstance. That wasn't just, oops, we upset somebody and we kind of backed our way in. I think they truly could be one of the top 4 teams in a district that includes, 3 teams that are, at least 3 teams that won playoff games last year, one who played for a state title in Weatherford.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a tough district. And then Chickasha, as good as they looked at, as good as they looked against Altus, they have another team from kind of the Southwest Oklahoma area this week in Marlow. And Marlow, of course, is a 2A school, but they were 3A a year ago, very big 2A school. And I covered them in their playoff game against Kingfisher last year. That could be a really fun game that you get to go to this week, because Marlow brings back so many weapons from that team last year. The running back Chase Knight is just a bulldog, and Jace Gilbert is their quarterback. He's extremely mobile. Oh, and by the way, he's one of the best kickers in the state. Will probably be a potential D1 prospect in a couple of years. That you could be looking at a 45-38 game possibly on Friday night. I hope for your sake it is, but it could be a fun one.
I'm expecting it to be a fun one, and I think I know there's a 2-class difference, but again, Marlowe was just in 3A last year, so I don't really think this isn't like Enid playing them a deal last week, 6A
Right.
playing 3A. I think these two are a lot closer than what the class implicates that they are. And like I said, I haven't studied Marlowe too much yet, but I know they have high expectations for this year, and this would be a good non-district win for Chickasha to kind of continue build that resume.
I think that's going to be a very interesting game. Unfortunately, the other team that you covered the other night, Altus, takes on a Cash team that we just talked about. That I think that's going to be a tough game for Altus. And also in your coverage area, you have obviously Chickasha is one of the big ones, or is the big one. But you guys cover some of the other schools around there. What are the expectations for teams like Rush Springs and Minco?
Well, Rush Springs, Rush Springs is feeling good. I know Coach Mason Anthony, he's in his second season, and he's feeling confident that Rush Springs is going to be able to take that next step, which is what they're hoping to do. They went 6-5 last year and made the playoffs after missing out 2 years ago. He's excited about this team. They're moving Zane Harper, who was a receiver last year, to the quarterback. And, Cade Warden as a running back and a linebacker he's really good. And that district is not the easiest district in the world. You got Ringling in there who won the state championship last year and I think is one of the favorites to win it again this year. But, Dibble won 9 games last year. So what Anthony told me was one thing, staying healthy is key for them. They had some injuries last year. So if they can stay healthy, he's feeling good about what he's got. And then as for Minco, it's kind of we'll see situation, I think. They lost a group of seniors who was really good, including like their quarterback, Kevin Russell, who could flat out play. But, he's feeling confident about what they're coming back, especially up front on the offensive and defensive lines. He thinks they're going to – and what he told me was they might have to – he feels – sorry, blah, blah, blah. Up front, the Bulldogs will have to probably depend on their defense early on until their young guys can kind of gain experience going forward.
Yeah, and that's going to be very interesting.
In that district, I haven't actually memorized Minco's new district. I know that one got completely 2A kind of got, or Class A kind of got reshuffled a little bit.
They're actually, if I'm not mistaken, they're in a district with a lot of the
I think Apache and Mangum.
Walters, Mangum, and Carnegie moved up from Class B from the 8-man ranks. I believe they are also in that district. And it's going to be a very sneaky good district, I feel like. That is going to –
because I'll say this about Minco, too. They are well coached. And so I know Brock Wardlaw, the head coach up there, is going to have them ready to play each game. And I assume they'll get better as the season goes along. And they open the season with a little bit of a rivalry game next week against Dipple. So that could be a good early season test for both teams.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting, going forward. And I'm looking at y'all's page right now. And I again, like I mentioned earlier, it's such an odd, I shouldn't say odd, but, interesting place geographically where you guys are, because you have a lot of the kind of southern outliers to the OKC area. So, you guys write about Alec, you guys write a little bit about Tuttle, and Tuttle's a team that I think people might be sleeping on a little bit in Class 4A.
Yes. And that's one team going back to week 0 kind of won headline. I was Tuttle beating Sulphur 28-7. And so that is, to me, and they'll have another 3A test this week against Plainview, I believe.
Oh my gosh.
And so what I think Brad Ballard and the coaching staff up there has done a good job of is reloading instead of rebuilding, because they've lost key pieces from that state championship last year, and they still made it to the semifinals. And so they're replacing key players again this year, and Sulphur's a good win to start the season.
Sulphur's a really good win, and
especially by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and that's never an easy a place to play. Those kind of South Central Oklahoma schools, like the Ardmores, the Plainviews, the Sulphurs. I really think that's just, to go to Sulphur and then face Plainview, that's going to be very interesting for the Tuttle Tigers. And, I mentioned to Kevin Green last week that 4A was one of those areas, one of those classifications that I didn't feel super confident about when I was casting my votes for the AP poll. I read that Wagner and Weatherford are going to be good. I don't know if I believe that Weatherford's a state winning team necessarily. And I was trying to think, well, who else would be next? Poto lost a lot from last year. And then I looked at Tuttle and I said, that's a program where you can just never sleep on them. I feel like Brad Ballard, like you mentioned, he's one of the coaches that unless they're a local team, I have a really hard time memorizing coaches' names, but that's a name that you recognize because he's very accomplished and he's very good at what he does, not just on the field, but what he does with those kids. And Tuttle, I think,
and you got to think,
I would not be shocked to see them possibly play for a state title.
And also, you got to think Bethany probably going to take a step back this year, maybe.
We'll see. Yeah,
they've kind of been an X factor for me in 4A1 because if they're good, that just adds another tough team in that district.
Absolutely.
I know they got kind of Jones beat them by I think 31-7 or so this week or something like that.
Jones took it to him, but Jones also, Jones is going to be really good and has a quarterback that's getting some D1 looks. I know.
Again, that's Bethany's first game without Sam Brandt, and then I believe there was a receiver as well. So they're having to replace plenty of players too. So
for sure.
At least some key players. But I've always said I'm not quite familiar about that 4A on the eastern side, but the West is just going to be brutal, I think, this year.
It's going to be
especially
hellacious.
When you got John Marshall coming in, and then you got, I think Blanchard has high expectations this year, and they're kind of what Coach Craig was mentioning to me. They kind of want to redeem themselves from missing the playoffs last year. And so, I mean, I think 4A1 and 4A2 are both just tough this year.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that we were kind of talking about, on kind of games getting rescheduled or games getting, having to be replaced because some of these teams were initially supposed to play Texas schools. And of course, Texas, the UIL said that the class 5A and 6A weren't going to begin play until later in the fall. One of the big matchups that took place that really, it shouldn't have shocked me as much as it did, but man, Bixby 34 Union 0. That one definitely proved that the king is not dead. Not that anybody's necessarily saying that, but as somebody on one of the Tulsa TV stations I saw said, when people talk about the Tulsa area and 6A football, they always mention the Big Four in Jinx, Union, Owasso, and Broken Arrow. He said, I know they're in a different classification technically, he goes, but I think it's a Big Five. I think Bixby is definitely worthy of being in that group, and while they may not have the numbers to put them in 6A1 anytime soon, they definitely are as good as any probably 6A Division I team, and even after losing Brennan Presley last year, his little brother looks almost just as fast, and it's going to be very interesting to see Bixby going forward. I went with the chalk. I said that they'll go ahead and win a state championship again because I have no reason to believe they shouldn't.
It's one of those things where you got to see it to believe it.
Exactly.
Someone's got to come and knock them off, and I don't see any reason to pick against them. And then I believe they got Jinx this week, who they beat by 50 last year.
It's going to be bonkers to see what happens, and a lot of good games in the Class A areas or the Class A on the eastern side of the state. Stillwater and Edmond Santa Fe. Santa Fe is the team that lost their first game of the year, but I still have high expectations for, like you said, Jinx and Bixby, Union and Broken Arrow. That's going to be a big one. And then, you go to 6A2. I'm very very interested in seeing what Midwest City is able to do against Carl Albert. I don't necessarily expect them to win,
Right.
but that should be a big one. And then also in the Mid-Del City, even though they're playing on the road, Del City going to Booker T. Washington. That one I would pay money
That was
to
one I
see.
looked at today. Yeah. Yep.
And then locally, just south of you, locally, certainly for me, is Lawton High playing Duncan. I think that could be a very interesting game. People have been pretty high on Duncan. They return. I mean, they lost some pieces from last year, but they return Tate Wilkins and they return Chance Brookshire. It's going to be a very good team, I think. And then, in Class 5A,
Duncan may be a team where at the end of the year their record might not show how good they are, just because that district they're playing in is pretty tough.
That's true. Yeah, that is one of those things where I was, for our football preview, trying to pick up my those district predictions, and MacArthur. You feel like MacArthur probably has a shot at the playoffs, but then you realize that they missed it the past 2 years, and then you still have El Reno, Noble, Ardmore.
I think Ardmore might be an X factor in that one too. I got to see him a little bit in the scrimmage again. They scrimmaged up here. I didn't really get a sense of a feeling of how good they're going to be or not.
And you mentioned a team like Noble. They're playing Blanchard this week. That's going to be a pretty fun non-district game. And then Coweta and Wagner play, and that's going to be interesting. What's sad is I mostly think it's interesting because Coweta, not that this would necessarily affect the team per se, but maybe if there's stuff going on construction-wise, if you followed, the accident that happened over the weekend where a drunk driver basically drove into the stadium and destroyed part of the Coweta Stadium. I shouldn't laugh because it is very dangerous, and you're just happy everyone was okay and nobody was badly injured. But oh my God, it was just it's absurd that can happen. And you see the photos of the bleachers being ripped out and such, and that blew my mind. And does that change their practice regimen this week? Do they have to practice on one side of the field? I don't know. As if playing against the number one team in 4A wasn't tough enough. So that's going to be interesting. And then, I don't know. It's just going to be also going to be very interesting to see what happens in terms of games possibly getting rescheduled or canceled, because we had already heard prior to the season that a team like Western Heights, I think, had talked about going week to week and deciding not to play until they felt safe. And then just south of us here in Lawton, Walters decides the day of the game against Hinton that they're not going to play because a player for Walters test positive for COVID. And again, this is just kind of playing out the way that I thought it would, is eventually you'll see school by school by school kind of then peter out, and we'll see if that has a mass effect or if the schools that aren't affected just choose to keep playing. I think they will, but it's going to be very interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I say I'm especially interested to see exactly what happens and what the process is for when it happens, or if it happens to a district game. Because it's one thing for it to happen to non-district opponents, but what happens when it gets into district play?
That's going to be the big telltale. Is we've seen weather knockout games before. We had a couple of teams last year, I think, have games canceled due to rain, and you'll get the playoffs, and some teams' record is 8-2 while their opponent only played 8 or 9 games. It's very very bizarre, but I think it's going to be very interesting now that we'll have had, for at least most of these school districts, a week of school under their belt and a mass amount of people at one sporting event. It's going to be very interesting to see. Now, I wanted to close out the podcast. I like to do kind of some interesting or kind of off-topic things. One thing that I've asked everybody that's been on here is just for my edification for whenever I do get to travel outside of the Lawton area. I'm always looking for a good spot to eat. And so I know that there are some really good restaurants outside or in and around Chickasha. What are some places that you would recommend or some kind of diamonds in the rough?
Okay, well, couple places. You know, I think everyone talks about Jake's Rib, and it's good, really good barbecue. Okay, so one of my favorite places, you know, I don't really eat out a whole lot anymore because of everything that's going on, unless I bring it in or have it delivered, something like that. But J&W Grill has really good burgers.
J&W Grill, and that's in Chickasha.
Yes, that is in Chickasha. Yes.
Good.
Problem is surrounding places. I usually just do fast food because I'm usually don't have time to stop and eat anywhere.
Right.
So, and then this year when I do, we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm not going to stop and eat in anywhere. But like I said, J&W Grill has some really great onion burgers.
Ooh, and onion burger, as somebody who's not originally from Oklahoma, that is one of those things that I've always heard about being
Yes.
kind of an Oklahoma delicacy. I know there's a couple places I think in El Reno that do it really well, and I've I don't think I've ever had like a true onion burger. I mean, I've might have had kind of like a kind of a imitation of an onion burger, but that's something I'm really interested to try. And then one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you know, whether it's food or movies or music, people talk about guilty pleasures. Well, I don't think you should feel guilty about what you love. I bring that up because you are a shameless fan of two bands that people consider two of the most hated bands. You're a big Nickelback fan. You're a big Creed fan.
Yes.
And I think it is kind of silly because when people turn on bands like Creed or Nickelback or Imagine Dragons, I'm like, well, the joke's on you. They've sold 15 million albums.
Yeah,
they had to have been popular at some point for people to hate them.
Yes.
There's the old saying about hate being a close relative of love. I feel like people just do not. I get it. Certain bands become repetitive and whatnot, but I would be lying to you if I said I didn't own Silver Side Up, as well as probably a couple of Creed albums growing up. I know I owned Weathered, and I think we owned Human Clay as well. And,
Human Clay, yes. That was one of the first albums I ever listened to.
And I remember vividly listening to that song, hearing Higher in TV commercials and television, movie trailers, and just thinking, well, that's like an inspirational song if I ever heard one. And you know what? That's, I think that is what I appreciate about you, is when people like to, throw shade on certain bands on the internet, or I sheepishly say, oh, I still like Higher, don't hate me. You're like, I don't care. And
I had it in my Twitter bio for years. So Nickelback fan. So listen, I feel no shame when it comes to that stuff.
I'm trying to think if there are any other things that would be considered guilty pleasures that I was a big fan of. I have long said that I preferred the Cleveland Show probably to Family Guy.
That is.
The Cleveland Show is a very niche thing that only probably a few thousand people really enjoyed, but I did. And I've watched all 4 seasons probably about 20 times because I'm me. And I went ahead and looked up a list of hated bands, and I will ask you, Austin Litterell, whether you think they deserve the hate or you think that you're fine with them.
Okay.
We'll start with one that if I find somebody that really, like, I don't like to judge people on their listening, pleasures and whatnot, but if you're a fan of this band, I got a lot of questions. Let's go with Limp Bizkit.
Not a fan.
Yeah, and most hated. I don't really hate most things, but I can understand where Fred Durst and the boys from Limp Bizkit.
I think the one Limp Bizkit song I liked was a cover.
Okay, yeah. Was it Behind Blue Eyes?
Yes.
Yes.
I actually didn't think that was terrible.
That wasn't
terrible.
the
original.
Oh, the original was by the Who, and
Okay.
it's great, but I don't think they did I get it. They weren't. It wasn't horrible.
That's probably why I don't hate it though, because I don't know the original.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and it was different than anything else they actually did.
They also did a cover of George Michael's "Faith," in which
Huh.
if you ever wanted to know what it would sound like to have somebody like guttural scream the word "faith," check out that song. This one I take a little personal offense to, but I get it. Blink-182, because
What?
they were
Oh,
they were a big part of my adolescence. They were one of the first big concerts and one of the best concerts I ever went to. When they reunited in 2009, I went with a few friends to Dallas, and we saw. And again, a couple other bands that I think people probably throw some flack at. They did a big tour with All American Rejects and Fall Out Boy, and that was that was '09. So Fall Out Boy was already popular, but they weren't like mega rock stars like they are now. And,
I will say, Fall Out Boy's first 2 albums though are amazing.
Incredible.
Now they kind of maybe current Fall Out Boy I can pass on.
Another band that I didn't see on the list, but I feel like is similar to Fall Out Boy in that they've kind of lost their roots to a certain extent. How do you feel about Panic at the Disco?
Hit or miss.
Yeah.
I was never the biggest Panic. There were some good songs back when it was more of an actual band. It's kind of just Brendan Urie now.
It really is kind of just Brendan Urie now. And I think Brendan Urie is an incredible musician.
I'm not saying he's not talented or anything.
Oh, no, he's incredible. Yeah, he's very good. But other bands that they have on here, if my computer would decide.
Blink-182, that surprises me.
I know some people that it is kind of a punchline, and I'm guessing part of it is because, when you're like 30 and singing about high school problems, it's a little disingenuous.
I can get that, yeah.
And then Tom DeLonge kind of had whiny voice a little bit, and he's kind of gone off the deep end since then. Dave Matthews Band, again, we kind of talked about. It was very. I was never into them.
I couldn't get into Dave Matthews Band.
On here it says the Goo Goo Dolls, and underneath it says interchangeable with Matchbox 20. And now, see, I was always a Matchbox 20 fan. I've always really loved.
I enjoyed both of their music back in the day.
Yeah,
Iris is incredible.
Iris is an incredible song, but much like a song like I don't know, take any other sappy love song, and I'm just kind of like, I've heard it about 80 times. We're good. Kind of on that same note, there are bands that I respect the heck out of, but their like main claim to fame song, I'm kind of iffy about. One such band, the Eagles. I think the Eagles are great, but if I have to hear Hotel California in a grocery store one more time, I might punch something.
And I won't lie, I have their greatest hits record on vinyl, so I'm an Eagles fan.
Well, that's just a flex right there.
Yeah, my favorite is Hotel California is not my favorite Eagles song. Yeah, I'm a huge pop punk. I love my pop punk music, so Blink-182, Simple Plan, I was kind of always into.
I joked with some people last year that I joked last year that 2019 was going to be the year that ska came back. I'm a big fan of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and my wife and I were actually supposed to go see Real Big Fish in Oklahoma City last year. Didn't end up getting to go, but we were all set to go, and I was like, well, the next time they come to town, we're going to go see them. Well, as you can imagine, most tour dates got canceled this year. So, and one thing that I'm kind of realizing too is and I just thought of another band, and this brings up a very interesting connecting tissue between some of these bands. And I read a whole article about this. Was ESPN last night began their college football coverage again with Austin P against I completely forgot
Central Arkansas.
Central Arkansas, yes. Well, every year now for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, they'll have like an official college football anthem that they'll play on their Saturday nights. And,
Yep.
you know, it probably started with Fall Out Boy's Centuries. And then I think they chose.
I feel like Fall Out Boys had been that song a couple of times.
They did. Then they did. What was it? They did Imagine Dragons.
Yes.
Natural.
Yeah.
They chose Natural for that one. And then I think the year before that, they chose the Walk on Water by 30 Seconds to Mars. And I was like, okay, when you hear those songs that become very repetitive and are very earworm songs, it's what they're designed to do, is get in your head. Yeah, you're going to get a little itchy after a while. And I think Mars is one of those bands that I can understand. I think Jared Leto is an incredible, talented person, but
that's a band that went way more pop too as they went on.
I definitely get it.
I kind of stopped listening to them.
I was way into them for a little while, and then I was kind of like, okay, we're done here.
Their song "Kings and Queens" is like, I don't know if ESPN still uses it for Wimbledon, but it was used for Wimbledon I feel like years after that song came out.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of having loved that song. But
it was a good song.
It's a great song, but they used it.
That album was kind of where I stopped listening to Kings in 30 Seconds.
And then Imagine Dragons, of course, because that song got used so much by ESPN. ESPN then chose to have them perform at the halftime show of the College Football Playoff, because that became a thing, apparently, that the College Football Playoff decided it needed to be like the Super Bowl and have a big halftime show. That I don't think even, necessarily had anything to do with the game. I think the Kendrick Lamar one was outside the stadium. And but one thing that I think, I think people, when Imagine Dragons performed that halftime show, that was when they started getting a lot of Twitter hate. And I was on Twitter during that and just seeing the stream of comments like, oh my God, this needs to end. And another band that performed at a halftime show that I kind of, blame for some stuff is, after the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake incident, you had a string of a lot of classic rock bands because people were like, they're less controversial, which is hilarious to think that in a day and age where the Rolling Stones were considered not controversial at a certain point. And then that string stopped. I don't know if you remember, but that string stopped in, I believe, 2010, 2011, when they got Black Eyed Peas to perform the halftime show at the Super Bowl in Arlington. And then ever since then, we've had Madonna and Katy Perry and Bruno Mars and Coldplay.
Underrated halftime show, and I know the band actually wasn't allowed to play their instruments or something like that, was Bruno Mars and the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
It was incredible.
I love the Chili Peppers.
The Chili Peppers are a great band, and also Bruno Mars.
That's where I started to really like Bruno Mars too, was that halftime show.
That really, when he started going to town on those drums, when it was 40 degrees out in New York, I was like, okay, I'm with this guy. He's pretty cool. He's known for kind of poppy music and stuff, but he's like a legit musician.
Yeah. And it's fun pop music,
It is. It's not bad, yeah. And I think that is one of the things. It's like, when it comes to music, I think it's silly when people are like, oh, that's chick music, or that's black music or white music. I think good music is good music, and you should be able to enjoy whatever you want to listen to, even if it's Nickelback.
And I'm going to say it. Taylor Swift's new album, really good.
And I have nothing against Taylor Swift. It's just not my cup of tea. And you know what? Seth Olson, my old coworker, was a huge T Swift fan. Very big T Swift fan.
Yeah. I know we've talked about us not meeting. Seth's always been the one who's been at the games that I've been at. So I've crossed paths. I'll never forget, we covered state softball, and we stopped at Norman on the way back because both heading the same way. And I swear he was so sunburned, and I swear his face was just turning redder and redder by the second.
That's our boy Seth, man. You got that.
I was like, yes, I know that feeling.
He got that Irish skin. Well, Austin, thank you so much, man. I do appreciate this, and
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime you want to come on again, I'll be happy to
Please
have you.
feel free to invite me. Like I said, I'm free pretty much whenever you need me.
Just listening to vinyls and playing Fall Guys. That's his life some days, I'm sure.
Well, I can't go to the movies anymore, so.
That's a good point. Yeah, and there were some good movies I was looking forward
Or I
to
guess I
seeing this
could
year.
at some point. I won't, though.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Well, Austin,
Yep.
go enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and
Thank you.
best of
Yeah, you
luck.
too.
Hopefully we'll have a rest of the high school football season, and in the meantime, we have a good week 1 to look forward to.
Yes, we do. I appreciate you having me.
All right. For SpOKen Freely, I'm Glenn Brockenbush. We'll see you next week.
Jungle.